about 6 a.m. here in the United States. East Coast. Good morning, Pinelanders, and the Lord's blessing be upon you all here on Thursday, the 10th of February. And I want to thank you for tuning into the show. Today's going to be a show where we're going to just wander. I don't know how else to put it. There's a lot of open source intelligence. The plot hasn't resolved itself, so I'm going to tell you things that are happening in the world. Some are true, some are rumors. I'll try as best as I can to distinguish between what I think the odds are on any of them, and we'll see what you all make of it. And maybe we'll come to some conclusions by the end of it. Sometimes the show works that way. If you hear a little bit of noise in the background, I'm upstairs here with Dana. We're just hanging out, so although I don't think she's going to participate too much, but you may hear a couple chickens go off in case today will be the hens. We got Barb up here with us, and we got Faith, who has a wounded toe, but the girls are doing good. And let me give you a homestead update. If you are in a cold climate thus far, I will say of the birds we have of different cold hardy birds, the Rhode Island Reds started popping out eggs first. So don't know if that means anything, and they weren't exactly the same age, so it's not exactly an apples to apples comparison, but it is a commendation. They are a cold hardy, easy to handle, generally personable, although a little territorial if you put them singularly, bird that works very well. So Rhode Island Red, they're sassy chickens, and we'll see if our Orpingtons catch up to them, for those of you who are chicken breeders. Anyway, like you care about that, all right? But anyway, people like the Homestead Report. One other story too before we get into this, because I know people are coming in, so give them a second. So yesterday, some of you know we've had turtles a long time. I think you've seen some of them on the show, maybe if you've been a long time viewer across the various manifestations. And we've had a couple who have passed away in the previous years, but we have an interesting report, which is we didn't expect it. We have a couple redfoots, which are a South American tortoise, and they were taking a soak, which is what they do. They need to do that, and we found an egg. We weren't expecting to find an egg because we weren't even sure the genders of these things. With turtles, it's really hard to tell. So, yeah, that was interesting. And we looked at the thing. I'm like, did the wife leave a bar of soap that fell in there? Or, I'm thinking, like, what happened there? But there was an egg. So, we focus on death a lot, but there's life too. And there's hope for things. So let's keep in mind of that. And, there's always the good hope that the Lord Jesus offers. So that's definitely a good thing to remember too. All right, so for those who want to support the program, real fast, the Venmo CVC PRV, your contributions help keep this going. You know me, I'm doing a lot of research these days, which I'm grateful for. I also have been practicing for my ham radio test, so you pray for me on Saturday, and it's a silly thing, but hey, I want to be able to communicate with you. I got a 97 on a test today, which was good because I got 280s beforehand, and that kind of annoyed me, but, sometimes it goes that way. As long as you're consistently hitting the mark, the thing about getting it on the board is good enough, and I only have to get a 74, so let's hope I'm not that. If I can't do this, maybe I should be doing this show, because although there is stress, it's not close to me, but it's fine, not a big deal. Buenos dias, Patches, hope you're doing well, and just a reminder, P.O. Box 350442 is the Venmo. All right, so now we've done the preliminaries. Let's get into the show a little bit. So, I want to go to New Zealand for a second. We haven't talked about New Zealand at all, other than saying that Jacinda Ardern, World Economic Forum superstar, generally unrepentant, five-letter word begins with a B, seems to have been running a really rough show down there, and we haven't heard much from the New Zealanders, but the Kiwis showed up. There was a big protest at Wellington, that's their capital, over at Parliament House, as they call it, and it got pretty violent. We saw people being dragged away and bodies. I haven't had any reports on casualties of this, but it certainly was very aggressive. There's stories of people being thrown out of wheelchairs, and that people are sick of the unending lockdowns. New Zealand, as many of you know, has had some of the harshest lockdowns, and we see what started I shouldn't say started, but what accelerated in Canada, because the Europeans were out there and the Australians had gone out a few times, but we see this thing growing with great speed. Another story that I sort of hesitate to report, but, this is open source intelligence, so it's a little bit more than a rumor and a little bit less than a fact. Take that for what it's worth. And I've seen the pictures, so I know what they're talking about. Back about a decade ago, they used to have some really big protests at the G20 events, anti-globalization, whatnot. And one of the things that was used sometimes was they had a series of basically, let's call them sonic emitters, where they would basically emit a puke ray. I don't know how else to say it. It turns out that if you emit a frequency about 2.5 gigahertz, you can make people vomit, and it's really unpleasant, and it's really awful, and you haven't seen policing use that very much, at least not in the first world. The Australians have it out of Canberra. Now, have they used it? No. Are they going to use it? I don't know, but I think people need to know it's out there. People have compared it, and it looks kind of like a trailer, not very big. Like, if you've ever seen one of the ones with, like, if you drive through small towns in New England, I don't know if you have this in other places, have, like, these, like, speed cameras saying, like, and they're not, they don't give tickets. They just say, this is the speed limit. It tells you, you're supposed to drive 25, and of course you're driving 40. It's just the way it is up here. And you have these, but it looks like that. It's like a bit black box trailer that comes behind, and they showed pictures comparing it to what the actual device looks like. Do we know for absolute certain that that's what it is? No, but it looks like it, and given the pictures, it seems, and given the way Australia's been so heavy-handed, at least in certain states, you would think that's a real possibility. 1 second. So let's talk about Canada. Our friend Arthur Pavlovsky was arrested yesterday. That's the Calgary preacher who was out there speaking at Coots, who has been a target of the Alberta provincial government for a long time. Apparently, based on an interview on Rebel News, they were trying to shake him down for information about the organization on Coots. Last night, there was a lot of intel breaking. That apparently, there was a heavy reinforcement that happened at Milk River. Just to put it in context for you, for those of you who haven't seen the videos, basically think of it this way: there's the border, okay, between Alberta and Montana, where it intersects I-15 coming into Montana. Then there's the border station. That's where the Coots people are blockaded in by the police. Then there's Milk River, which is the counter blockade of the protesters keeping the police in, which is a little misleading. But there's layers of this. It's like an angry jelly donut, right? There's just it's a terrible combination, but it's really what it is. There's it's like lasagna. There's a salt layer, there's a cheese layer. There's what do you say, a pork layer. That, who the pork is. But anyway, this is what's over there. So they have been heavily reinforced overnight at Coots. But the protesters actually, so they're holding out. Jason Kenney, who's the premier over there in Alberta, has said they're going to scrap passports, but they have not agreed to other things. Although we are seeing movement in that direction. I listened to True News last night. Prince Edward Island is moving in that direction. Newfoundland is moving in the direction of opening up. Quebec is promising to move away from the idea they were going to tax the people who didn't have this. So there is movement in a positive direction, although none of it's coming from Justin Trudeau, who, and also, I should say, the conservative nominated guy, Pierre, what's his name? Pell something, Pellevier, something like that. Went out there and said, "Oh, we need to get these trucks back on the road and get them away." And he did the cucky rhino thing. I mean, I don't know what you call it. What you call a Tory, a Hoary? I don't know. You guys in Canada are very names for people. Maybe some Americans can help you with that. Um, I don't know. But the short version of it, the reason why it's important is the thing that's happening now. We're going to talk about a place we haven't talked about, which is the connection between Ontario and the United States. Which there are basically four major places. If I'm missing one, please correct me. But there are four major places where connections happen. On the eastern side of Ontario, on the southeast Ontario, you're talking about the connection between Buffalo and Niagara Falls. Those are, I want to say it's the Ambassador Bridge, and no, the Peace Bridge and the Friendship Bridge. I've been over a couple of these. You think I'd remember? And there is rumors that the Peace Bridge, there was people gathering over there. So I don't have any updates from this morning. And Lord knows, just so you know, for intel gathering purposes, a lot of what I'm doing is I'm watching live videos where possible, reading some news stories, but talking to activists on the ground, watching in real time how stories are spread. There are rumors. I'll tell you what, there's a rumor. Speaking of rumors, I don't know if it's true or not. I'm disinclined to believe it, but I'll share it because it's interesting. That there is a document that was supposedly issued by the Prime Minister's office. It's just a piece of paper, so it could be a flyer. Anyone could do this. I want to be very clear. But what it said is that Trudeau is willing to meet with the truckers, and that in the interest of proceeding for the goal of having mass inoculation, that for any trucker who in that group. Oh, I can't from here because I don't have what I'm doing on the phone. But what it said was essentially what it said was that and is that for the truckers who are there, that he would love to see things get back to normal. But the way to do that is through inoculation, and then also in the interest of spreading that, he said for every trucker who's there who gets inoculated after the 8th, that he would give 5 minutes of time to the collective group, and for everyone who had been inoculated prior to that, they'd give 2 minutes or 1 minute, depending on certain criteria. The idea being that they'll meet collectively, I guess on Friday is what it said, based upon the number of people who get inoculated. And of course, as you can imagine, this was not well received, and it was thought of the worst form of what you want to call it, the kindly say persuasion, the honest say extortion. Now, do I know that that's actually accurate? I have no idea if it's accurate. I really don't. I saw it. It looks official, kind of, but it looks official like any Xerox copy could. I could make that, if I was trying to an hour on Photoshop. And yet, it's interesting because it's a sort of extortion. Let's put it this way: if it didn't come from Trudeau, whoever did this is pretty good at propaganda and manipulation efforts where they're trying to piss people off. Because from the elite perspective, the idea that you're going to try to control the narrative, and it's the sort of thing, honestly, they shovel feed by by, should I say, the loadful on CBC, so it's almost kind of believable in that sense. And in the other sense, I mean, it's insulting, but it also says the government says, "Hey, we're trying to work with you," but you're not trying to work. You're not understanding because they say, "Oh, it's about the mandate. It's not about the inoculation." But let's be honest, this is all about the inoculation. If you think otherwise, Elon Musk's tweet about it was as savage as it was actually accurate. Where he was saying, the people who have gotten the jab do have a bigger heart. Literally, it's been enlarged, and I'm sure he's going to get in a lot of trouble on Twitter over that. But then again, maybe not. Certain people do, certain people don't. It's actually interesting to figure out who is allowed to say certain things and who isn't. And I would suggest to you, in terms of your own information consumption, if you find a channel where someone never gets banned despite saying edgy things, you might be questioning them. Whereas me, I get banned all the time for saying things that are pretty innocuous. So obviously, someone doesn't like what I'm saying, and that's fine. I'm going to keep talking. Mm. But we're talking about Canada, so we're talking about there were four bridges, and then there's two. There's the one by Sarnia coming into Detroit, north of there. I think it's by I-94, maybe going to Flint. And then there's the Windsor Detroit connection, which is the Ambassador Bridge. And the Ambassador Bridge has been shut down. Now the trucks removed themselves from the bridge, but they're still blocking the on ramp, and that's fine. I think that's good. There were a lot of trucks on a bridge, and American infrastructure. I'm glad they're not on the bridge for the safety of all involved. The last thing we want to see is Pittsburgh reenacted here. And I actually knew the bridge over there through Frick Park. I actually used to be on that bridge back in the day. I remember I lived there for a dozen years, so I know a lot about that area. But anyway, so apparently, the Biden administration is starting to get involved, reaching out to Trudeau. Here's the problem, and I don't know if this is true or not, because remember when they were having what was it? Not the lockdowns, the bailouts. How Ford went along with it, they pushed back and whatnot. But apparently, and this is actually true because I used to do courier work, so I understand this. The automobile industries of Canada, of Southern Ontario and Michigan as well as Ohio, actually, there's a lot of plants there, are inextricably linked between parts and consumption. And the shutdowns in Canada and the protests along that bridge are causing, as of Saturday, the Ford production plants in, as I understand it, Michigan, are going to be shutting down because of what's happening. Now, let's take a step back for 1 second. Just understand this. They had problems anyway. The microchip shortage, the shutdowns of goods coming out of Taiwan because of instability over there. So they were having issues with production, not to mention the fact that they've built whole fleets of cars where they don't have the electronics to make them work. It's a big problem. But in any case, the reality is this plant is shutting down on Saturday. The claim is being made that that is happening because of what's happening up in Canada and disruptions in the supply chain. And the story that's getting out there in the activist circles is that the American government's starting to put pressure on Canada to make something happen now so that this thing opens up. And I think you might see the reason why the leader of the supposed the guy who's running to be the new head of the Tories up there in Canada is pushing so hard against this because he's saying it's going to cost us $500 million a day having these shutdowns. And yet that's exactly the point. And you see all these people say it's terrorism to go and lock down the economy and not allow people to live because you disagree with their politics. I'm like, yeah, that's kind of the point. and I think they're making it well. But I tell you what, the longer this goes on, the more my view evolves. That I think it's a grassroots movement that's happening in Canada that has a lot of good people behind it, and that for better or worse, this thing has to be seen through to a happy conclusion. But it is so well organized that there's obviously either state actors or people with state actor experience. Maybe it's white hats who did work in military intel. It would not surprise me if there's a heavy American influence between how this is being leveraged. The way this movement was set up is very American looking as opposed to Canadian looking in a lot of ways. Although whoever was up there understood the unique assets of Canada, which is to say that you could oppose certain things up there because the Royal Canadian Military Police is not a trigger happy, gun toting organization, unlike our Federal Bureau of Investigation, which, goes ahead, attacks Christians, takes a knee for BLM, and now is labeling people who support the First Amendment and say that elections might be fixed as potential domestic terrorists. And they can do that because they drummed everyone out of the military because everyone got jabbed. So the people who got jabbed are getting sick, and that's our military defense. And the people who chose to do good things are now left on the outside. I don't know. But what I do know is this, that the movement, it could be someone like it does have a Steve Bannon-esque feel, someone who thinks that way, and probably someone we've never heard of. But that's absolutely true. They're definitely, there's a motivating force of this, of someone who knows how to play the game, who understands media coverage, who has connections to get certain leverage through, and is using the tools and implements. Because, I mean, I couldn't, and I'll tell you, and look, I study this for a living, I couldn't have arranged this better if I had direct control over these sort of things, because there's a lot of pieces involved in this that you would need to be able to put out there where you get people organized enough for them to come out, where the system wouldn't respond fast enough. And they've been able to take advantage. Someone understood the weaknesses of the system very well up in Canada and exploited them in a way where they allowed freedom to begin escaping in some sense. But let's keep in mind this, that we have people who are out there supporting the idea that they're against the governments, they're against these things, but they don't really know what they're for yet. And yeah, it's a good start to get these things removed, but eventually that's going to have to be articulated. I don't know, but what I do know is that if the government, and this is the prediction I'm making, if the government of Canada wants to make a move, they got to do it today, and I'll tell you why. If they would let this get to Friday to Saturday to Sunday, the crowds are going to swell again, and the problems are going to accelerate and exacerbate. And people are feeling momentum for this, and because they're feeling momentum, I think we're going to see another surge of people. And we're hearing, there's a lot of convoys you're not hearing about. There's ones in Winnipeg and Manitoba. There's different groups of people gathering in different places. I've heard about some people in BC, and this is something that is spreading. And eventually, people are watching. And so many groups, people ask, where are the Americans? And the American context, for those who don't live in the United States, you have to understand, Americans have to be sort of careful about how far we move forward because we are literally all armed to the teeth and we all have a lot of issues with one another. And that's one of the reasons why. Plus, the lockdowns are not as bad here because we sort of self-segregated in a lot of ways. Even in a blue state, like I functionally live in at this point, that if you live in a red county, the extent to which you actually have to deal with oppression, other than the fact that you are persecuted against for not taking certain things in terms of your employment and whatnot, which we've either made terms with or we've, moved to a deal with, by and large, the pressure is not quite the same. Nonetheless, the financial support coming in from the United States is huge. The Give, Send, Go, last I saw was up to $7 million, and that's almost 24 hours ago. I'm sure the numbers have gone up markedly since then. So we'll keep an eye on it. But, but speaking of social numbers going up, just a reminder, if you're here, please hit like when you come in. And the reason I say that is because we're trying to grow the algorithm a little bit. It's bad enough YouTube doesn't share any of these sort of streams. They don't like me. But that's what we try to do. We get the information out there. And I try to give you good information and probably analysis you don't get anywhere else. So just take the minute, hit the like button. You don't even have to like it. I don't even care if you actually like it. Some people say care. I don't. We're gaming the algorithm, and that's how it is in the world. We have to play these games. So that's the update from Canada. Rumor is the Royal Canadian Mounted Police are bringing in, I heard number 1,800. I heard another number 300 coming into Ottawa to try to shut things down. If they don't do it tonight, the numbers will swell. And the rumor on the streets, or the report, I shouldn't say it was a rumor, it was a report, was that the police were taking firewood from the people who are there. Because, I mean, it's Canada. It's cold. I mean, look, I live north of Ottawa, okay? It's cold up here, and it's a different world. So what we are seeing is the truckers are holding out. A couple guys have left, but by and large, people are in for the long haul at this point. They understand. They want I think what they want at this point is law on the books that says there will be no more lockdown mandates, shutdowns, and that COVID is now endemic. And it's interesting because you see other countries going out there and saying they're going to move away from these things. Even in the United States, the governor of New York went out there and said that they're going to get rid of, for the state, not the city that's separately run, the idea that there are indoor masking mandates. And I think it's curious, the rumor that was floating around that is that the Democrats want to say, hey, we beat this, it was our things, and then claim success, kind of like a mission accomplished George Bush thing. They don't come up with new things. They just do the same things over and over again. So we'll see if that flies. I don't think it will. I think that the suffering is real. And I think that one of the things to keep in mind, and this is something that people who are questioning the convoy ask, and it's a fair question, um, is the convoy being set up as the fall guy for supply shortages and logistic shortages that the corporate establishment's been desperately trying to cover up, that's happening because of the fact those ships weren't unloading for many months, that productivity has gone to absolutely zero, in many ways, and it's something we should be asking. All right, so that's the update for what's happening in Canada. We'll keep an eye on that over this weekend, but I am making a prediction that if the Canadian government wants to have some sort of resolution of this where they reduce the size of this, and they may not, they may want it to get bigger because they may have interests that say that, hey, we want to set these guys up as the fall guys and have them have a big demonstration and have people not get food, and say that, hey, there's no food in the supermarket. I saw a video coming out of Ontario that shows the supermarket empty, and they might bet, the government might bet, and it's a reasonable bet, is that the that they want to blame the truckers for the fact there's no food in the supermarkets, whereas the reason there's no food in the supermarkets is this crazy World Economic Forum standards, the Greater Reset. You're going to eat bugs and like it, that sort of crap. Because they weren't the ones who shut down agriculture. They weren't the ones who limited, mobility for. Exactly. And here in the United States, they weren't paying farmers to destroy their crops. And we haven't talked about it in a while on the show, but I went and reviewed the Ice Age Farmer chat before I came in here. Food productivity worldwide is down markedly. Borders are closing between countries. Borders are closing on the internet, and the hardening of lines, both within countries and between countries, is growing. So let's talk about that for a second. Russia and Belarus are starting their operational exercises, and that has the West spooked. The British foreign minister was actually in Moscow last night, and Moscow said, if you keep talking about sanctions with us, don't keep coming back because we're not going to deal with you. And some of you will have seen the press conference that Putin and Macron had afterwards, where Putin basically said, if you mess with Crimea or you try to annex Ukraine into NATO, then it's going to be war. And he went out of his way to point that, well, NATO may have greater conventional capacities than the Russian Federation or the Union State, whatever they call that, not counting their burgeoning alliance with China, that what they do have is they have the world's best nuclear arsenal, they're claiming, essentially. And this is why certain things we're hearing are interesting. Britain, at the same time, they're talking about Russia's horror and wanting peace, sent 100 anti-ship missiles into the Kerch Strait, to the Ukrainians over that way. And for those who don't understand, the Sea of Azov, the Kerch Strait is how the bridge that connects Crimea, which is where Russia has its naval base, is connected to mainland Russia. And they have a whole bunch of cruisers there, and Russia is actively working to militarize. They've made this publicly known. They're militarizing the Black Sea so that they don't have to deal with certain threats in there. And telling Turkey, you better keep those waters open, according to the Montreux Convention, which says that it's a demilitarized zone, much like how we treat our Great Lakes between the U.S. and Canada. There's no reason we couldn't have warships on there, pointing at the Canadians. Maybe we could help them, take Trudeau out or something. I don't know, but. And of course, I'm just joking about that because Lord knows you can't make jokes these days without having a knock at your door. But what we do see is that the UK is doing that. And I have it from good sources. I know two different sources, people I trust, telling me a bunch of mercenaries are being called over to Ukraine who say they're going over there just because they're looking for a fight. So whether that's Ukraine trying to re-add the Donbass, whether Ukraine has this delusional idea they want to go into Crimea, I don't even know. But there was another thing. There was a 4chan thread that was huge about this, and I just mentioned it's open source intel, but apparently someone flubbed the transponders, and it became clear the U.S. was moving a bunch of B-52s into the U.K. Now, whether that was done intentionally or not intentionally, I can't tell you. There's always these mental games. Warfare is deception. But what I can tell you is troop movements toward the east continue to accelerate in NATO, that there is there's pushback from a couple countries, Hungary being one of them. On the other hand, there are countries that are coming on board with it. Slovakia, an air base there, Romania, and it's sort of interesting. If you look at who were the old Axis countries and France, which really says what they did about the myth of resistance, those are the countries that don't want to have a war with Russia. Maybe because they remember the punishments that the Russians doled out. On the other hand, if you look at countries that were part of the alliance, and including, like, take Romania and Hungary, for instance, if you look at the borders, and not to open painful history, but if you go back in history just a little bit, the map of Hungary is a lot bigger and the map of Romania is a lot smaller. Why? Because Romania was fighting on side with the Russians and with the Allies, as opposed to Hungary, Bulgaria, Germany, Italy. Japan's a different story. It doesn't apply. Those sort of countries seem to be very circumspect about the idea of a war with Russia. And so you see the U.S., the U.K., you see Sweden and Finland having more exercises. Interesting how much they seem to be integrated into the NATO network. But I read a really smart article. I was on a website. I think it was called Strategic Insider, and it was saying the reason we're rushing into Ukraine has everything to do with those hypersonic missiles we've been talking about. And the idea is they want to close the missile envelope so that they have a deterrent against Russia. Because right now, the Russian missiles are too fast for America to be able to respond back. And that's why you hear about, the idea of, is there going to be a THAAD battery, which is one of the more advanced American missile batteries put into Kharkiv, which is 24 miles from the Russian, or 24 kilometers rather, even less from the Russian line. And the Russians have said this is basically a red line to them. They've said all they can kind of say, and yet we see troops moving into Ukraine, and we see the increasing occupation of Ukraine. Ukraine has literally become an object on the chessboard for various people, and I don't know how much say they have in their own fate at this point. I still think it's interesting, the rush to get people into Western Ukraine, from Ukrainians themselves to people who are fleeing, and reports on the ground of that happening. The U.S. Embassy moving westward. The understanding is that southern and eastern Ukraine is going to be potentially a target zone very soon, and the reason being, incidentally, it's going to be blamed on the Russian, but to be honest with you, the West is doing everything we can to provoke them into that sort of an attack. And what does that mean for the larger picture? Because we have this war within states, we have the war between the states. I don't know. It's getting pretty nasty out there. Let me think if there were any other big stories that I saw news-wise that I'm predicting. We have the Super Bowl coming this weekend. I know nobody cares. I don't care. Maybe you care. I don't. But the fact is, having convoys in California, maybe there's a lot of talk in the community, maybe going to blockade that. I don't really think it's a brilliant idea. It's the sort of place they like to do spectacles. I don't know. What else are we watching? The protests and convoys are continuing in other countries. I saw a couple of videos coming out of Brazil. Movement is growing there. And Brazil seems to be the only right-aligned country left in Latin America in a lot of ways. Everyone else is moving leftward pretty quickly. Colombia is one of the last holdouts. Maybe Costa Rica kind of is an in-between thing. But we are seeing those movements happen very quickly. And we're seeing at the same time inflation and food scarcity continue to be an issue. I mean, food prices are continuing to rise. And as these trucker revolts accelerate as a response to government, I mean, you kind of wonder, are governments trying to set up truckers as the fall guy so they can say this is the reason you don't have food, so that they can bring people into some conflict or some oppression? At the same time, we see the insane administration here in Washington trying to label everything in America it doesn't like as a terrorist. The branding and the psychological conditioning that's out there is to label everything as an insurrection. And this is what it is, but really it's a resurrection if you really want to think of it, of people trying to express their civil rights. And let me be very clear. My position as a Pinelander, as a Christian monarchist, as all these things, is that you're not going to solve a political problem, a spiritual problem with political answers. The problem in the West was not that we had too much liberty. In fact, if you're really honest about it, it was our liberties and our wealth that made us impervious to the idea that we would stand up and fix problems of tyranny being imposed upon us because we had too many comforts. And while I think people want to go back to liberty and freedom, and I think these are healthy things in and of themselves, I think it's an incomplete understanding of the problem of you have degeneracy. And even if the people succeed up there, the problem is their lack of answers of where they want to go with it. It's going to be a bigger problem. But hey, you have to win one fight before you get to the next fight. And I think the answers about what's true will reveal themselves in time if this isn't a setup. But a lot of people who are old hands, who are canny operators, are watching this and saying this is set up in a way where it can work out very well for the system, for the machine, for the establishment, and in controlling people and setting up a fall guy for a problem that was going to happen anyway. Much like they did for those of us who look at that way with COVID. They were saying the problem was automation was good to displace workers. Now it's blamed on of disease, so you can't hold those to account. And who would you hold to account? It seems like over and over again, the World Economic Forum plays a big role in this, and that you have to trace that back to its funding sources, which go to the various banks of Europe and the United States and whatnot. The Federal Reserve, Bank of International Settlements, City of London, Bank of England, those sort of entities, the same people as they always do. And the question is, who's going to control the Great Reset? The reset's on, the world is broken. We've talked about that enough. What is the future going to look like? And the problem is, if these people who are activists don't succeed, and I believe the overwhelming majority of them are good intentioned, that their failure will be used as the excuse for the lockdown, where the bad guys will succeed. So this is what happens in war. You end up with unhappy allies, and we now have alliances of the simple thing is the Freedom Alliance is basically the people at the bottom who are fighting against the system. And in the optimistic view of it, the chance they have is they have stakeholders. The truckers are stakeholders, people who have the ability to inflict pain upon the system because they're of value. We need more stakeholders to have a chance. So if you're a middle class, if you're a fireman, if you're a policeman, this is the chance for you to go out there and stand. You want to know how these things work well? It's when you have the blue and the red and the truckers and the working class people all saying to the government, we won't do this. The military will not fire on this. Not in the Western world. Only the Chinese were cold enough to do it. The Russians wouldn't even do it. And that's how the Soviet Union fell. So we're going to see that effort. And I think one of the things that was encouraging and thoughtful about this was the arrangement that was set up in Canada with the courts about who can bring gas in. Apparently, by Canadian law, volunteer firemen can bring gas to anyone who's in need. And the trucks can say their needs. So if you're a fireman, a volunteer fireman, who up there, Europe and Canada, you want to really play a big role and show support, now's your time to go to the aid of your country. Get some people to Ottawa. And I know that's a dangerous situation to walk into a little bit. They're not trying to make it dangerous, but the government, the bigger you are, the less they can do. This is a question of whether fear will win or whether people will be able to stand their ground. And it looks like in Canada, at least, there is a hardcore of people who are standing, and the government really doesn't want to push into them, but they're trying to get the people to turn on them. And to this point, they haven't yet succeeded, but they're going to continue that. And if it gets bad enough, could you see a provocation being done on, deceptive means? Absolutely, you could. You might expect that. So that is the operations report for what I am seeing out there. If I make a quick prediction, and I'm even on the record for it's a cynical thing betting about it. I think we will see some violence in Canada before the end of this weekend, and I do think the government's going to go in there tonight and try to do something. And I say that because they don't want the numbers to swell again. They need something that makes the numbers get smaller, and they need to scare people off. The basic propaganda they tried to do, even in Canada, there was a story that was going on about Coots, that's over in Alberta, where apparently the RCMP was setting up like some trucks on the side, and they were setting up like almost like a stage acted screen, and people were recording this on video because this is what they do. They create an image. What they did was they took a bunch of there were a couple trucks, and they were putting a bunch of Canadian police around these, and these trucks were removed from where the general blockade is, but they were filming coverage about some sort of resistance being offered. Like, people were recording this at a distance, so it's hard to say exactly what was happening, but it was almost like they were on the set of where the actual protest was happening and telling a competing narrative. And we've seen this already. They go out there, they say, oh, we see all these swastikas. I don't know why they don't say swastika. Why do they have to pronounce things weird? Anyway, and it's just that one word. But anyway, so they get them out there, and they're sitting on the Parliament building where the people can't get to, and they have Trudeau's personal photographer, what's his name? Adam Scotty, I think is his name. They have him out there, taking these pictures, and then they put that out to the world. Well, we oppose this because these people are all evil, and they're all Nazis. And this is what's the danger, that you have these bad actors that are being set up where they can put a false image of what's out there. And that's what the people on the ground are most worried about, is shutdowns and coverage. The coverage of Bell and Rogers, those are the two big internet providers up there on mobile, has been very spotty at times in Ottawa. And by that, I don't mean that, like, they have low coverage areas. Obviously, this is the heart of an urban area. I mean that kettling the ability to take away that coverage is something that people are very, very worried about. And last night, I know a bunch of people were worried because that wasn't available. So something we'll have to watch is late into the night what reports are coming out. And for those who are watching on Telegram, there's a lot of information that's ongoing constantly. It's basically a drip stream. I do think tonight will be the last slow night. Friday always ends up being a party. The Quebecois weren't allowed to go out there, come down and start doing techno late at night in the square. I don't know if they're going to come down again, but they've been doing it every other weekend, and kids got nothing better to do. So I suspect we're going to see more of that. Hey, James, good to see you. Hope you're doing well down there. God bless. What was I going to say? that we'll have to watch how this plays out, but I think if they're going to do something, it has to be today or tonight. And I think that certainly is something that's really imminent. My talk on the power of words in the Book of James is why I chose my major. Amen. Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you watched the sermon I did on Sunday, or at least I tried. I'm struggling. I mean, just as a small side, I just ask you pray for me, pray for Dana, pray for each other too. But just it's hard to feel connected to the Lord when the world is falling apart, and let us remember as we watch this, the temptation is this world really can't be saved, but we can save one another, and the limitations of what we can accomplish in this world. And never to forget that in false optimism, as much as false cynicism, that we think that this world has answers to our problems. The Lord has the answers, and if we want to live in a lordly world, we'll have to follow His system. I don't think we're going to do that in any scenario. So I think part of us has to always keep a little bit apart, but we are watching this develop, and we should root for people who are trying to find their way to the truth, kicking and scratching, and sometimes it's helpful if you find truth in the world, you can begin finding truth that's bigger than the world. Because I know a lot of us have walked that pathway where we've looked at the world and we've seen the limitations of what it has to offer. I mean, Lord knows I had to do that for many years. A lot of involvement in politics, literature, books, whatever, being a prominent dissident, and realizing the limitations that doesn't offer any answer. What does? The Lord Jesus Christ, the promise of salvation, that there's a world beyond this world, and even in this world. Jesus was our Savior, but He was also a great teacher. And a lot of our people who don't really, or who try to appropriate Jesus, to reduce Him to that. And the reason it works is because His words are really good. The way He wanted to live was really good, but He was not, a second coming of the Buddha or an ascended master. He was the living Son of God who died for our sins, and that we need to recognize that and have the understanding of faith and mystery that's required to understand that God is bigger than any of us, and just ask for Him to look out for us. And I know a lot of us are under attack. I can't come speak to you without my tongue going numb. And this is why I'm having a hard time doing long shows. Even at this point, I'm going to have to not talk for an hour after I end this show, and I don't know what's happening to me. Someone said to me, one of our members said it sounded like Havana syndrome, where what they were doing was they were targeting certain people certain ways. And, I have Wi-Fi at the place. Maybe they do. Maybe this phone does it. And I mean, I seem to have these problems, and I talk to Dana all day, but when I do this show, for whatever reason, I have problems, and it's really annoying and it's frustrating. But hey, you know what? If my tongue goes numb, I'll come on here and be like, Jesus, and I'm gonna go and speak that, and if I have to go silent, that's fine. I'll write. Lord knows it's easier for me. It's not as fun for you guys, but that's fine. You gotta just keep speaking your truth, and we're gonna have to be vigilant. We're gonna have to be smart, and we're gonna have to remember what the Lord said, which is to honor God first and take care of one another. And I would say that to you. I'll say it as a quick prayer because I don't know how much too much more I have to offer. If you have any quick questions or comments, bring them up, and then we'll draw this one to a close so we can take mercy on me this morning. But if there is something big breaking, I'll do shorts and keep you informed, which is what we try to do on this channel. Because I said no big conclusions today. We're watching the narrative play out. Heavenly Father, we just ask that you give us the wisdom to understand, to see those who are speaking truth, to see those who are speaking deception, for courage for the people who are being persecuted for speaking truth, and that we ask that you look out for each of us and help us find a way toward your wisdom. So whatever happens in this world, we can find our way home to you, Father. So in Jesus' mighty name we pray that. Amen. You want to add anything, dear? Okay, so other than that, I'm gonna go take care of mucking the old stable. I spent a long time doing that yesterday. Give a homestead update. I'm gonna give a quick prepping update before I close. Food supplies, I think the food shock is coming in about the next week or two. If you've been waiting to the last minute to get your supplies, your perishables, now is a really good time to get it. Get food you can keep for a long time. And I will say, if you can get access to it, I'm going to make a prediction. If you are someone who relies on this for farming or whatnot, and I think I'm going to take my own advice if I can do it, but it might still be too early up here. But if it's not, if you're in a southern latitude, if you're going to need fertilizers, topsoil, stuff like that, those things are going to be in low supply. Fertilizer worldwide is a problem, and getting things around and logistics is going to be an issue. The idea you put something in the ground, a seed, and you just grow it is an idea that people who've never planted before think. It doesn't really work that way. It takes many years to work your soil into something quality, and if you're starting at this point, you don't have that time. Pro tip: get the supplies ahead of time you're going to need for your planting season, whatever it is. I'll give you a simple thing that works really well in Maine and other cold weather environments. If you get some of those big, like, black round laundry tubs, and you get a combination of, so you want to get peat moss. I think it's like 1 part peat moss, 1 part, what do you call it, manure, and get maybe 2 to 3 parts, depending upon your direct climate there, of a good either potting soil, and if you have a little cheap, mix a little topsoil in there. Potatoes will grow like crazy in that medium, and they are cold weather hardy. If you put them in, you can put them in pretty early. They'll start sprouting. You could even put them in, even in Maine. You could put them in like 60 days early potentially, and get to food production if you need to do that. So that's something to consider. Also having those fertilizers, having the ability to have some food, what we talk about, phosphorus, nitrogen, and potassium, having those basic fertilizers around. I think that those are going to be things that are going to be very hard to get beyond food supplies. So sort of advanced prepping if you're thinking ahead about how you're going to grow things. I will tell you, if you do not do it regularly, your yield versus expense input of farming is very difficult. So if you have something that can be a perennial producer, something you can do that's simple, even if it's little herb gardens. I'm not trying to scare you away. I'm just saying these things are not easy. There's a reason why people don't do them and they outsource them. Farmers live a subsistence level existence. Like look at us. We've probably spent, I don't know how many hundreds of dollars on chicken feed to now just start getting some decent egg production. We're getting 3 to 4 eggs a day, and it's good. I'm grateful for it. I mean, we have our chickens. And I'll be honest, unless I absolutely have to, I wouldn't slaughter the chickens. Do you want to come in the camera, Faith? You want to come here and say hi? All right, let's say hi to Faith real fast. This is our chicken. Just go here. Say hi, Buck Buck. Faith has a little bit of a wounded foot here. I don't want to put it on camera, but you can see she has her big toes. One of the things that people don't know about birds is that if you look at their feet, they're like little hands, really. And like if you've ever seen a dead bird, just when we say a dead deer, it's not living, but you feel them, they're warm and they're finger-like, and you start to realize why birds can do things. But she lost a little toe here. I don't want to touch it on her back thing. I don't know how that happened, but Faith is a good bird. And in case you don't know, just a little fun fact about chickens. Do you know chickens can actually see UV light? Most birds can. One of the reasons I think that birds are able to magnetically work their way home, although when you see the magnetic poles move, they have problems, is because they can actually see UV rays and they can see magnetic rays, but what they can't see is at night. We have some things in our eyes called rods and cones, right? And the rods basically allow us to see at night a little bit. We can see motion, and the cones allow us to perceive different colors. Most humans have 3 types of cones: red, green, and blue, which is why that's the visible light spectrum for us that we know and see. Combinations of those colors, which you might recognize if you've ever colored anything on the internet. But with birds, they have potentially 4 and maybe even 5 versions. They can see UV light as well as they can see certain magnetic rays. So they see the world literally in an entirely different light, and so when they're following their instincts, they're literally following senses they don't have. But the reason why chickens and a lot of birds set in at night is in exchange for having all those rods, they don't have cones, and that's why they're at danger at night and why they hide up high. Just an interesting thing, and this is one thing I recommend. Understand the environment around you, understand the wildlife, understand how plants grow, understand the seasonality. Keep paper copies of things that are interesting. If you don't have a guide about your natural foraging in your area where you live, what are your mushrooms, what are your birds, what are your fruits, what are your fish, and have a fishing pole, have things around, the ability to do things. That's a very smart, easy prep that every one of us should be doing. And if you live in here, hell, if I lived in a city, I'd know how fricassee a pigeon. You need to know how to do these things, and then you can laugh. It is a little funny, but these are the sort of skill sets you're going to need to know. And if you're in an area where you don't have anything, you better have a lot of preps. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. The other thing people don't think about with their preps, just a pro tip: if your preps make noise, volume, light, or make appearance, or they make you seem like you're not dependent on the system, you will be a target. So be very aware and don't let people do that. Best way to do that is have alliances with your neighbors, talk to them. And if you can't have that and you're in a bad area, you got to think about where you are or think about how you're going to overcome that. The future may be very violent. Let's hope that I'm wrong about that, and that it doesn't work out that way. But as the system's breaking down and the theft has become so obvious because there's nothing left to steal without it becoming obvious that a lot of people are in trouble, we're going to have a very hard way going forward. So I will say this, not the best way to get them, but if you have a heart for it and you want to try, Chick Days is probably starting in about a month. I'd say over at Tractor Supplies in southern climates, and then you come into eastern climates or northern climates, you'll have things. Having a couple chickens around, I would not do what we do. What we do is ridiculous. But I think that if you wanted to get yourself and you have space for it in a garage to have a project and you want to get some bedding, you're willing to give that up. That if you're willing to have 3 to 6 birds for egg production, for protein, you're talking about 110 calories of proteins, fats, and you want to have that on there because you're not going to be able to get, if power goes out and refrigeration's a problem. Your ability to get proteins and fats is going to be your issue. Yeah, I'm going to hunt. Everyone's going to have that idea. About 10 minutes later, it's going to be gone. You need to have the ability for productions. And if you really wanted to know the most efficient sort of homestead prepping thing, it's to have rabbits for meat, chickens for eggs, and I would say, what else would you say is really essential if you were going to do that quick? Now the quail's fun. Quail's good, but quail's work. I mean, duck isn't bad. A duck's tasty, but it's not really good. It's in terms of performance. Wild turkey is something you want. Fish is another thing. If you can have a pond, if you have property and you have space to do that, fish is really good. Geese, yeah, you could. Yeah, geese pays real well on the market, but that and and if you have to farm, get a donkey. You could get a donkey or get a little mule, a little mini horse or whatever. But those are the things. But if you were looking for the two things to get into, in my opinion, as I don't want to say a pro, but an invested amateur at this point, chickens and rabbits are quick and you can feed them pretty easy. I think that's the point. The three mothers method, absolutely brilliant. Squash, corn, and beans. You're talking about three. It's interesting. James called it the three mothers method. Maybe it's called something different in Texas. Yeah, but up here it's called the three. It's the Indian planting thing, and you have to understand what your soil have here. Rice and beans are the best protein, but rice is hard. Rice is hard, but you know what? Rice is cheap too. If you're not going to Welcome to Costco, I love you, or if you're up here in New England, BJ's or Sam's Club, go buy a bunch of rice. Go buy a bunch of beans. If you're poor, if you have the $100 diet, okay, beans, rice, and oil. And no one talks about oil, but I'm going to talk about oil for a second. I keep a ton of olive oil, and the reason why is you need healthy fats, and you're going to have a hard time getting to them. And you need something that can be shelf stable at different temperatures. Butter works fine. You don't have to just keep it in the fridge like they tell you, especially if you're not in a real hot environment. And if you have a cold cellar, if you're down south, maybe that's different. But otherwise, I would say that's okay. Those are things you can get, so be ready for that. And make sure you have at least some supply of closed up water here. I think that is something that's really important. And for people who don't understand, I should talk about the three sisters method. That's what they call it in New England up here, the tribes, but it's the same thing. That you're looking for synergistic ecologies between different things that grow together. So the corn grows high, the beans grow on the corn stalk, which they need something to support them. So you're getting the extra legumes there. And that the squash grows on the ground where it works out fine because squash takes up a lot of space, but in a cornfield you have space. And what happens is they each add and subtract different things to the environment. I've read it once before, which one adds potassium and nitrogen and phosphorus, but they work in concert with one another. And that you start to figure out, if you don't know, one thing to look for is there's a couple books on organic gardening, companion planting. If you have a small space of area and you're planting certain things, you have to learn who loves what. Like there's a old book called Tomatoes Love Carrots and Other Truths of the Garden that you might want to invest some time into. Although the problem with carrots is actually they improve the yield of the tomatoes, but they have issues with the soil quality over time. Remember that everyone hates onions. That's something you'll find. Potatoes are difficult to deal with anything else, but a lot of herbs, like the reason why tomato and basil taste so well together is they grow well together. And if you start to understand what grows well together, you understand the supplementary herbs they provide to one another, and you can begin putting those pieces in play. But by and large, if you don't have a lot of time, or dehydrated milk, butter powder is another great choice. Get a butter churn, by the way. I would love, and we were going to have milk production, and I still think to this day having a goat is better than a cow for that in general. Cows produce more, but they also eat more, and unless you're using it as like an oxen for your herd, I don't know, maybe ox milk. I don't know anything what that's like. Kind of wonder. But the thing about a goat is goats will forage. They'll remove wild grasses from you if you have the ability to do that, and they don't have some of the lactic acid problems. And the colostrum, if you end up in certain positions, is really really good, and goats can get the production. Plus, goat meat can be used for a lot of things. So I'm a big fan of them. Sheep, not so much. Which is fine if you have them, by the way. But if unless you're going to be knitting your own sweaters, I mean, honestly, for the amount of time and effort involved, you'd be better off raiding a Goodwill. And by the way, do that too. Go get yourself. Always shop end of season. When winter's ending, go buy winter goods that people are getting rid of at price, rather than summer goods, and vice versa. One other thing, if you haven't been outside before, get yourself the ability to have warm weather body coverage. People think in the summer, I'm going to wear a t-shirt, I'm going to wear shorts, I'm going to wear these things. When the sun's beating down on you, you're going to have a lot of problems. Would you recommend any specific, either natural or easily available sunblock solutions? Because I know that's something you know a lot about, Dana. Let me take a drink of my tea too, because actually both.
You can make your own sunscreen with coconut oil, red raspberry oil, and zinc oxide powder.
That's pretty impressive. Yeah,
Um,
coconut oil is another one of those super things you're going to want to have around, useful for a lot of
I
things.
actually like working outside in linen because it's cool. Linen will keep you cool and it will keep you warm. It serves both of those functions. It's a neat fabric like that.
And talk about the importance, just for 1 second, because you know this, of skin protection. If you leave your skin out, how fast you burn, especially considering that we do have a weakened and compromised in a lot of ways, atmosphere.
Um, well, that's why I said coconut oil, red raspberry leaf oil, and zinc oxide
And then
to
for
make
hats,
to make your own sunscreen.
a wide brim hat is something you're definitely going to need.
Yeah, I like bucket hats, something that have a brim wide enough to cover the back of your neck and your upper back and maybe your shoulders. I know it's not really practical, but sunburn's painful.
It is painful. So the other thing is that it's early in the season. Now people are buying. If you want to get a couple trees and you can still do so, you want to put them in. It's a long-term investment. Unless you're putting things that are producing, you probably won't in year one. You want to get them in before or right as the soil's thawing, so you might get some production this year. Something that's good to do, probably not essential, but if you have those, something that'd be good to have. So those are some things that, from the prep perspective, you should think about. But honestly, at this
And
point,
good footwear, oh my goodness,
yeah,
is underrated.
yes, it is. That's a really good point, to having the ability to do that. So those are things. And one last thing I'll say, I swear by having not a good wheelbarrow, but I like the Gorilla carts. Four wheels is a lot easier to move than three, because if one wheel gets stuck in the mud, it's much harder to stick two wheels in the mud than one wheel. Something to think about. If you're going to be moving a lot of goods, I don't care how strong you are, you're going to use a lot of energy. And the biggest challenge you're going to have if you try to farm or do any of these other things as you're going through these sort of problems is that the amount of energy you will output versus the amount of energy you will create by your labor is usually a negative equation. This is why machine tools came into the being. And if you have simple hand tools to help in different areas, and you can make things easier through good organization, good planning, and having simple goods that can, take advantage of things like leverage, wheels, things like that, you're going to like that. A lot of people are investing heavily into the electronics and mechanics, unless you have a gas station buried in your backyard. And if you have a propane tank buried in 1,500 gallons, good for you. You're ahead of the game. But if you are, you're probably busy in your bunker right now, not worrying about this. Be a good place if we could get to. But
What's your favorite tool? The one that you've gotten recently?
my favorite tool. I think everyone should have an axe around. I know that sounds funny. It's a multi-purpose tool, not just for that. I feel Slavic when I hold my axe. I don't know how to put it, but it's useful for wood. It's useful for if you have to deal with animals. I hate to say it, but if we have to cull our flock, having an axe has proven useful. So it's something you might not have around your house, but hey, it gives you a game changer. One thing I do recommend, for people who are a little more advanced, let's say you have a tool set, you have a set of ratchets, make sure you have a longer bar, like a lead pipe bar or something that you can use, so you can add extra leverage if you have to work on the quick end. Hey, you got to have your propane blowtorch. If it worked for Ricky over in Nova Scotia, it works for us. Definitely a fun toy to have. So, and useful, by the way, for a lot of things. I mean, whenever you don't know how to solve a problem, applying fire to it sometimes can solve unsolvable problems. Not something I want to say lightly, but something you probably need to be aware of. All right, so a little bit of prepping and background for each and every one of you. Hopefully, you enjoyed the show this morning. Went a couple places we did. So, speaking for our good friend Faith, so hopefully she'll recover. For Dana, for Barb, who's in the bin because she won't play nice with Faith, and everyone else who's here. God bless each and every one of you. Please keep safe. Please be smart about what you do. Keep in mind, there's a lot of bad actors out there, and just use common sense. And if you ever need any help with anything, feel free to reach out to me. You can reach me at newalbion@protonmail.com, or on Telegram. It's probably better and faster at Tom Kaczynski. I am not going to be around probably tomorrow. You'll get some weird shows from the road. I got stuff I got to do. I will be gone most of the weekend, but I will be back for Sunday, hopefully to put a good sermon together. And I do expect you'll get a show at some point, but it will be very difficult to predict when. I may do one tomorrow morning.
Oh,
It's
you should
fifty
do one
fifty.
with.
Huh?
You should.
Well, we'll talk about that. Maybe I might be able to do a guest show, but I don't know if
With
I
some
want to do.
figs.
I Yeah, well, that's another story. We'll talk about that off air. All right. So God bless each and every one of you. Reminder: if you want to support the program, the Venmo CVC PRV, you literally are helping keep a family warm through winter. I'm not even joking. That's literally what we have to do over here. So we appreciate that. And there are advantages, like we have water and we have that, but heat is always an issue here. The best thing you can do is a well designed system. Uh, PO Box 35, Greenville Junction, Maine 04442, and super chats are always enabled. Thank you, you guys. I will see you soon. God bless. Can't shut up.